Welcome back to the Top Notch Documentaries YouTube channel. In this episode of the serial killer series, I'll be going over the most unassuming serial killer I've ever come across, Dorothea Puente. Hope you enjoy. The best place to start with this case is actually at the end. It was November the 7th of 1988 when Bert Montoya had been reported missing by his support worker in San Francisco, California. Bert had a mental disability, possessing the mind of a 10-year-old. Originally from Puerto Rico, he had ended up living on the streets of San Francisco. Fortunately, he had been persuaded into getting off the street and had been living at a well-known and well-reputed boarding house. Strangely, he had not been in contact with his support worker for 3 months and concern grew as to his whereabouts. Police would arrive at Bert's last known location. The boarding house was popular with local people and the owner was even more respected in the area. Her neighbours loved her, and she had a careful and caring reputation within the community. Her name was Dorothea Puente. She was in her late 50s. Dorothea and other residents were questioned about where Bert was, and they all denied knowing where he was. Bert had previously wandered away from a boarding house in the past, and so police weren't approaching the situation with any concerns about the possibility of foul play. But during their visit, one officer was slipped a note which read, "She's making me lie." The note had police on alert, as all of the vulnerable residents of the house had given the same sort of statement when it came to providing any insight into Bert's disappearance. She knew something, or at a minimum, she had a sinister stranglehold over the residents. Thankfully, one of them had the courage to give police the note. Police would return on November the 11th and search the property with full consent from Dorothea. They didn't really find anything of much value. As the search and further questioning came to a close, police asked Dorothea if they could dig in her yard. Dorothea agreed. The reason for this was because the support worker from Bert's case had noticed mounds of dirt in her yard. Very weird. Police began to dig in the area of the mounds and would come across bits of leather and cloth in the ground. Why were these fabrics in the soil? They didn't have to wait long before uncovering their answer. A human leg bone was pulled from the ground. A shoe can be seen close by. And the crazy part was, it didn't belong to Bert. The decomposition timing didn't line up and neither did the autopsy recordings. It belonged to a female. Dorothea was nearby to witness the excavation and she appeared startled and shocked by the discovery. Even more shocking was the fact that she wasn't even arrested. There was no probable cause relating to the body found in the ground. No immediate signs toward foul play, and Dorothea had presented no red flags. She was an old woman who could have been your caring grandmother after all. Let's get into some of the tragic background of Dorothea. Dorothea Gray was born in 1929, so around the time of the Wall Street crash. She was born in San Bernardino, California. Her parents were very neglectful and her mother especially was cruel toward Dorothea and her 6 siblings. From a young age, Dorothea had to fend for herself. She was sexually abused by strangers on the streets as she wandered about asking for food. Her mother was out drinking at the time and had made the comment that "I hate being a mother," which isn't the best sign for a maternal figure. The neglect at home transcended into society for the most part because of the abuse from strangers and the lack of compassion shown to a young girl. She was around 5 or 6 at the time. Dorothea's father was a World War I veteran and she was closer to him than her mother, yet he was suffering from PTSD and so this likely derailed any solid foundations within the household. The only real positive in Dorothea's early life in terms of support was from her older siblings and Mexican families. They showed her love and fed her. Still, the damage had clearly been done. Dorothea became a fantasist. She would lie about all kinds of outrageous things, and I believe that she did this in an attempt to cope with her trauma. She told lies about being from Mexico with 17 siblings and a perfect family. This behaviour is attention seeking, but I can't blame a young child wanting that love and validation. Her lying would have helped to boost her esteem, and she might have even believed her fabricated stories. At the end of the day, her upbringing was horrific to say the least. Dorothea ended up in the care system and her parents would soon both die. Her father died of TB and her mother died in a vehicle accident. They weren't present in her life to begin with and so I have no idea how this could impact a child. Her lying was a constant throughout her entire life and it was picked up on by her first husband, a World War II veteran who met Dorothea while she was working as a sex worker. Dorothea had a charm that nobody could seem to explain. She was going under a fake name and this is another constant. And the marriage certificate said that she was 30. She was actually 16. The couple lived in Reno, Nevada, and had 2 children. Dorothea ended up giving away her own children for whatever reason, and her husband wasn't even aware of it. He was distraught and attempted to seek them out, and Dorothea became her mother in a sense, or at least imitated her behaviour. She drank heavily, neglected her children when they were with her, and cheated on her husband. And that last part may or may not be another similarity. Her husband became sick of the outrageous lies, and Dorothea mentioned Mexico quite often. All of these things culminated in him divorcing her. Dorothea ended up back in California and committed petty crime to survive. Her behaviour didn't halt, as you can imagine, and her lies only grew. She forged stolen cheques and stole from many people. In 1952 she married for the 2nd time, equipped with another fake name and backstory. She told the man that her husband was a war hero who died in battle. Dorothea also claimed to have been a world-renowned chef, and she personally knew JFK. Oh, and the Mexico lie cropped up again. Dorothea sure loved Mexico. The relationship was unsuccessful and it soon became abusive. In 1966, the divorce was agreed. The relationship hadn't worked out, and Dorothea came up with a new idea for how she would live her life. She opened a boarding house in 1966, the same year, to help out local alcoholics in San Francisco. Her intentions on the surface were noble. Everyone was thankful for her good heart and spirit. 24 rooms for people in need. But Dorothea had very selfish intentions. She really wanted their money. The only rule of her boarding house was that residents hand over their government cheques. That was her only requirement. She wanted full control of their money. It worked. Within no time, Dorothea had many new residents, and this could have been a positive transformation in her life, becoming the hero of her own story and saving people. But this story isn't that. Dorothea wasn't a good person. Dorothea preyed on the vulnerable within society, those without a voice, and as we'll get onto later, those without the ability to even fight back. Her victimisation as a child had moulded her into a true predator. She hid behind the image of a helpful community figure who was perceived to be a good person. In reality, she was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Let's get back to the present day of the case, November the 11th of 1988. Dorothea went down to the police station on that same day and answered some questions. She lied about her birth name, when in reality it was Dorothea Gray, not Dorothea Puente, and she claimed that she cared for Bert. Why would she kill him? She denied foul play and stuck to her story. She had no worry or stress, and even said that her physical stature made her incapable of moving a 250-pound body to her yard. Dorothea left the police station, as police had no evidence tying her to the leg bone found in her yard. However, with media attention coming to her property, some of her past actions began coming to light. Despite her many aliases, her fake names didn't keep her hidden in the shadows. Dorothea had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison on poisoning charges back in 1982. She had targeted vulnerable elderly people, and in the case that got her busted, she had met a man named Malcolm Mackenzie at a bar and ended up drugging him. At his home, whilst he lay paralysed with his eyes wide open, she stole valuable items and then fled. Once caught shortly thereafter, she claimed that he'd given them to her. Dorothea had been caught in the past for similar crimes, but escaped any real punishment. She had a tremendous talk game and could convince anyone that she was a caring old woman. Dorothea had fake diplomas, and she only needed a business licence to open a boarding house. They didn't even conduct background checks at that time, and she'd only served just 3 years of the sentence, which speaks volumes to how the authorities underestimated her ruthlessness. The day after the police station interview, police returned to dig up even more of the property. Dorothea felt nervous and asked to go to a nearby hotel for coffee, and she was allowed to do this. But 20 minutes after this, more human remains were dug up. Where was Dorothea? Police rushed to the hotel, but Dorothea had already fled in a taxi. She knew that her time in the free world was coming to a close. This was embarrassing for the police department, but the decision had already been made. An international manhunt soon began. The search at the property continued as a third body turned up. Lime had been put in the ground to mask the odour of the bodies, but it ended up preserving some of them. The body was wrapped in all manner of sheeting, tarps and fabrics. All had been binded with tape or twine. It turned out to be the body of Bert Montoya, and he had a plastic bag over his head. Just how had a 5'4", 130-pound elderly woman moved this body and the others? Someone must have helped her. The public tip line helped to lead police to John McCauley, the only person allowed to go to the second floor of the boarding house. He had information and he was interrogated, but he denied assisting Dorothea. and was let go. More human remains continued to be uncovered at the boarding house. Who were these people? 3 jumped to 4 and then 4 rose to 7. It is crazy to think that none of her neighbours had anything negative to say about her. Whilst this was going on, the media storm led to public tips circulating. The taxi driver who had driven Dorothea shared valuable insight, and police realised that Dorothea had headed south. The fact that she seemingly was obsessed with Mexico should have been a telltale sign, but she never made it there. Finally, Dorothea was caught on the 16th of November in Southern California. The manhunt had been a success, and a tip from the public got her caught. She was in the process of trying to seek out other victims. The motive for her crimes was becoming more obvious by the day: money. Autopsies were carried out, but determining the victim identities was tough. The bodies were all badly decayed, and trying to figure out the identities was proven to be a nightmare. Government checks enabled police to search for matches to the deceased. Dorothea was still claiming checks from people who were no longer at the boarding house, or even worse still, those who were already deceased. This financial investigation then led to medical records of these people being compared to the remains. This helped to crack the cases and identify all of the 7 victims. Dorothea had implemented her same previous method of drugging her victims until they OD'd and died. On August the 15th of 1993, Dorothea Puente was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder. She was given life without parole, and she died in 2011 at the age of 82. Dorothea had likely killed 9 people, and her first murder was likely a man by the name of Chief, sometime in the 1970s. He was an alcoholic and worked as a handyman for her. Dorothea had also murdered a woman by the name of Ruth Monroe, who had been planning on operating a catering business with Dorothea. Ruth had been perfectly healthy, but upon being around Dorothea, her health soon declined. Ruth trusted Dorothea, but this trust got her killed. Dorothea claimed that Ruth had committed suicide because her husband had cancer at the time. This was all bogus. Dorothea could have been a model citizen. She could have helped people and made legitimate income, but she couldn't stop preying on the vulnerable within society. Her issue seems to stem from her childhood of abuse and mistreatment, and she made the choice to become a predator and prey on those without much of a voice within society. This has been the Serial Killer Series episode on Dorothea Puente. As always, thank you for watching.